views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we present the debate for the Democratic primary in the 15th Congressional District, which includes a number of Bronx neighborhoods: Mott Haven, Hunts Point, Melrose, Highbridge, Morrisania, East Tremont, Morris Heights, University Heights, Belmont, Fordham, Bedford Park, West Farms, the Longwood Avenue Historic District, and parts of Soundview. This is the second of 5 weeks of political debates on BronxNet. We will get you the full list and schedule at the end of our program. Tonight's program is presented in cooperation with the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. Co-sponsors are the Bronx Times and Schneps Media. Primary, of course, is June 23rd. That's a Tuesday. And I know all the candidates and BronxNet Television, as well as our sponsors, urge everyone who's eligible to vote to come out and vote. There are 12 candidates on the ballot. 10 of them are with us tonight. You will get to meet each of them in a moment. Please note that Mark Escofri Bey was not reachable, and Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. Did not respond to any of our invitations to participate. Candidates, voter literacy is a core mission for BronxNet, and so tonight we want to make sure that each candidate gets a chance to be seen and heard. To facilitate that with this large group, we've decided to break up the candidates into smaller debate groups to encourage as much discussion as we can within the natural limitations of virtual technologies as compared with our in-studio programs. Within each group, a candidate will be asked a question. That candidate will respond, and the others in the group can weigh in with the original respondent having the final say. In all cases, we ask that no statement be longer than 1 minute. Please remember that because of the technology, each candidate will need to unmute themselves in order to speak. I also want to just add a personal word. This is a very difficult time for everyone, not only in the Bronx and New York, but in America and across the world. And for those of us, including myself, who've lost loved ones, we want to extend our deepest sympathies for those who have been ill or may still be ill. We certainly wish you a hearty get well soon. And we certainly want to encourage all of the people who are in the Bronx or anywhere to wear masks, stay socially distant, and let's work together as New Yorkers to keep us all safe. I will review each of the candidates and in order of their groups. So Marlene Tapper, Melissa Mark-Viverito, and Michael Blake are in Group 1. Shavonna Newsome, Ritchie Torres, and Julio Pabon are in Group 2. Samelys Lopez, Frangell Basora, Ydanis Rodriguez, and Tomas Ramos are in Group 3. So we will go through opening statements for each candidate. And by prior agreement, the first statement goes to Marlene Tapper. Ms. Tapper, thank you for joining us. Up next will be Ms. Melissa Mark-Viverito.
Hi, well, thank you, Gary. Well, my name is Marlene Tapper, and I'm running for Congress in the 15th Congressional District. I'm the child of immigrant parents who come from Barbados and Kenya. My grandparents come from Panama, and I'm kind of proud about the fact that they worked on the Panama Canal. I've always yearned to help people. That started out from the time I was a Girl Scout, and my focus has been on domestic violence survivors. As a domestic violence survivor myself, I was able to meet heads and go into shelters that are not public and help women reassociate their finances to start over again. My background is in legal, finance, government, and business development. I've worked for several elected officials. I've also been a political consultant on the city, state, and federal level. I volunteer actually as a mediator in the
There's about 15 seconds left.
South Bronx. And I think that the people in the Bronx need strong representation. And I also believe that NYCHA has been forgotten by the government. Hopefully you'll join the Tapper team.
Thank you very much. Our next candidate is Melissa Mark-Viverito. Thank you for joining us. Please unmute yourself, of course.
Gracias, Gary, for inviting me, and for those watching, thank you. I am running in this race because we need bold, brave, and courageous leadership right now. In these last couple of months, we have faced an unprecedented catastrophe here in the Bronx. We are ground zero for the worst public health crisis that we've seen in recent history. And this crisis has unmasked the systemic inequities that we face, not only in this district, but in this country. And these injustices are not sustainable. The recent murder of George Floyd and many others at the hands of police really indicate and showcase that systemic oppression that continues to really haunt us, and that we must dismantle that. So the system is rigged, clearly, and we must unrig it. So my record, my experience, my accomplishments of having represented this district for 12 years makes me the most qualified candidate to represent you and this district in Congress. So this is my life's work. I've been fighter for equity and for justice for my whole life, and now I will fight for you in Congress. So estoy corriendo para ser tu congresista, para luchar contra las injusticias que nos afligen. Quiero ser tu voz ante el Congreso y humildemente te pido tu voto. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Up next will be Michael Blake. You have a 1-minute opening statement, sir.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone at BronxNet. God bless everyone. As we're going through what's happening right now with coronavirus, as we're watching the blatant disregard for our Black and Latino men and women, we need bold, transformational change. My name is Michael Blake. I'm running for Congress because I was born and raised in the Bronx. I represent the Bronx. I've been fighting for the Bronx, and we believe in the Bronx. There was a pandemic of poverty and institutional racism long before coronavirus hit. And it matters who we send to Washington. From being born here and raised here, to working for President Obama, where we fought for the Affordable Care Act and the Recovery Act, to what I've been doing in the last 6 years on criminal justice reform, helping our entrepreneurs, helping our young students go to school, to what we're going to do now to fight for jobs and justice for everyone. What we're going to do now to have a cradle to career vision when we go to Congress. It's the reason why 16 labor unions have endorsed me, why 37 elected officials endorsed me, but why the people are here. And we talk about who's here and who's not here. It speaks volumes that Ruben Diaz Sr. won't show up for a debate. If he won't do that, then he won't show up for you. So if you believe in the Bronx and you believe in us, then join us at blakeforcongress.nyc. And I can't wait to debate the rest of this time. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Chivona Newsome is joining us, and I will add that she told us that she went to Minnesota, and so she's literally in the airport, I guess, in Minneapolis. But we certainly thank her for going out of a very long way to join us. So Chivona Newsome, you're next.
I apologize to everyone for the background noise. I am in transit. I'm waiting for our team's truck to pull up, and we are headed to the site where George Floyd lost his life. And the reason why I'm out here is because I'm a revolutionary, and we can no longer rely on politicians to help us through this crisis. When the NYPD was practicing racist practices with social distancing, me and my campaign, we called on that first. We put pressure on Governor Cuomo. We put pressure on Mayor de Blasio, and those laws have been changed. When we needed more testing sites because we foresaw when no career politician stood up, we called for more testing sites. In that same letter, we got that. We're the epicenter. They make us promises. They toot their experience, but we are suffering and we are starving and we are dying. I've personally fed by hand 5,000 people since this pandemic hit. I put my life on the line for the people. And right now I'm standing in Minneapolis because Donald Trump has said, if they loot, we shoot. Reporters who are doing coverages are getting arrested. Black Lives Matter Minnesota asked me to come out, and because I'm a coalition builder and organizer, I answered the call.
Thank you very much.
That's who you need in Congress.
Thank you very much, Ms. Newsome. Next up is Ritchie Torres. Mr. Torres, nice to have you with us.
Gary, I'm a son of the Bronx, born and raised. I grew up in poverty, public housing, with a single mother who had to raise 3 children on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25. And so nothing has been handed to me on a silver platter. I've had to fight for everything that I have in my life. When I first ran for public office, I was poor, on food stamps, had no ties to the party machine or the political dynasties of the Bronx. Ruben Diaz Sr. ran a candidate against me, and I defeated his candidate decisively. I became the first openly LGBT candidate in the Bronx, youngest elected official in the largest city in America. And for 7 years in the city council, I passed 40 pieces of legislation, making me among the most prolific legislators in the city council. So not only do I talk about change, but I've actually delivered change for everyday people in the South Bronx. And if elected to Congress, I'm going to fight for the things that matter, which is safe, decent, affordable housing, quality, affordable health care, and a job that enables people to sustain their families.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torres. Up next is Julio Pabon. Mr. Pabon? And unmute yourself, of course.
Yeah, I think I got it here. First of all, Gary, I want to thank you and the people from BronxNet for doing the democratic thing and not trying to keep people out because of the amount of money they raise. Because as a revolutionary that I've been all my life, living in the Bronx since I was 4 years old when we came from Puerto Rico, we've always had to defend ourselves. You can't live in the South Bronx, the poorest urban congressional district in the country since I remember, and not be able to do something to help improve the lives of people. The reason I'm running is because I've been here, I've moved around like, forget it, like, you know, traveling circus because of the fires, the gangs, the violence, you name it. But I've always stayed in the district. I've raised 3 children here. They're all doing extremely well, nationally. And the fact is, people were asking me. People were seeing who's coming into the race, and people were asking me. I said, I'm not interested. And they said, that's the purpose why you should run. Because if you're not interested in a job or career, you can go in there and say the things that most of the people that are on this debate won't say. There's only one other revolutionary on this. And that's why I support that. I support the fact that we got to move this to a new agenda. Progressives is not the answer. Revolutionaries are the answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pabon. Samelys Lopez, you're up next. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Samelys Lopez, and I'm running for Congress in the South Bronx. Mi nombre es Samelys Lopez, y me estoy postulando para el Congreso del Sur del Bronx. I'm from the South Bronx and spent years of my childhood in a homeless shelter because my mother faced domestic violence. The shelter system definitely saved our lives. I spent many afternoons at school doing my homework at my mom's sweatshop where she worked as a seamstress to make ends meet because she didn't have childcare at times. And my story is not unique because many of you watching this program right now have experienced the same obstacles in the community. And my early experiences in life shaped the lens through which I see the world, my commitment to social justice, to community organizing. For the past 10 years, I've helped build affordable housing here in the Bronx and in New York City, everything from acquiring sites to financing affordable housing developments to working with architects and contractors to get buildings built and opened up in our community because I refuse to sit by while other families experience the shame of living in a shelter system like I once did. And I'm definitely going to fight for universal housing as a human right, Medicare for all, because in light of what's happening with the coronavirus, healthcare should not be tied to whether you have a job or not. And I want to take big money out of politics because there's a lot of corrupt politicians that are more accountable to the real estate industry and not to the 99% and not our communities. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to earn your support from now through June 23rd.
Frangell Basora is next, and Mr. Rodriguez is after that.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you to the BronxNet, to my fellow candidates, and to the people of the Bronx. My name is Frangell Basora. I am from the Bronx. I grew up on the Grand Concourse. I am a product of the public school system in the Bronx, graduated, received a great education at Cardinal Hayes High School, and was able to graduate from Columbia. And since graduation, I have been in service to the people in the Bronx, to the people in my communities. Our goal and our vision is to lift our people out of poverty. And if change is going to happen, then it has to be us, the people. My family moved from the Dominican Republic in the 90s to the Bronx. I was raised by a single mom, so I understand exactly what our families need and all of the challenges that we face. We are a very strong people, and we need that to reflect in Congress.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ydanis Rodriguez is next. Mr. Rodriguez.
Limano say the immigrants get the job done. I got the job done washing dishes, driving taxi, working in factory, student activist, teacher, council member for 11 years. I will get job done when with my plan to eradicate poverty in the Bronx by 2030. We will lift up our brothers and sisters who've been living in systematic poorest area for the last 30 years. They will see a light where the working class will live in peace, with dignity and respect, with a path to take the children to be middle class. Yo soy el inmigrante que voy a acabar con la pobreza del Bronx.
15
voy
seconds.
a mejorar las escuelas, voy a crear empleo, voy a construir vivienda y voy a lograr apoyar el plan para que en los próximos meses a cada persona reciban $2,000 cada mes con el plan encabezado por la Speaker Pelosi. Y voy a seguir el legado de José Serrano, que ha reconocido el trabajo que hemos hecho muchas personas junto con él. Cuando trajo a Chávez, cuando trajo a Fidel, cuando ha traído aquí las voces de solidaridad con América Latina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final opening statement by Tomas Ramos. Mr. Ramos.
Thank you, Gary. My name is Tomas Ramos. I'm a first-generation Dominican American. I was the first person in this race before it was an open seat. Last debate, I spoke about my character. Today, I'll speak about the actions I've taken to better my community and the results I have delivered. As a program director working at the Bronx River Community Center, I saw a need for access to broadband and technology, and I took action. I created the first technology center in public housing. In early March, before Governor Cuomo shut down New York State, I saw how hard the coronavirus was going to hit our community that already lacked resources. Since then, I secured $3 million for Bronx clinics and hospitals. I increased ICU bed capacity by 33% for the entire borough of the Bronx. I believe our district needs a Congress member who can take action and deliver results in the most critical times. I look forward to discussing issues today. Mi nombre es Tomás Ramos y será un honor tener sus votos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you all candidates. So this is a rather unusual and unique setup. We have organized it so everybody gets an equal chance to speak. The first question, which everybody will get to respond to, but up first will be group 2, and the first question will be directed right to Mr. Torres, and Ms. Newsome and Mr. Pabon are in that group, and we'll get to have at it first. So, Mr. Torres, there are many causes for the coronavirus outbreaks that unfortunately placed the South Bronx as the epicenter of it in New York City. We'll talk about the particulars of healthcare later on in this debate, but I want to focus on the fundamental issue of poverty. The 15th Congressional District has been routinely addressed as the poorest congressional district in the nation. It's said so often that at this point, people barely notice the significance of it and what it really means for life in the South Bronx. As an individual Congress member, how do you attack poverty in the 15th Congressional District? And finally, once and for all, take away this albatross that has dragged so much of the borough down for so long. You get the first whack for 1 minute, Mr. Torres, and then Mr. Pabon and Ms. Newsome can weigh in as well.
But COVID-19 has shown the South Bronx to be the essential congressional district. The South Bronx is the home of the essential workforce, but the cruel irony of American society is that our most essential workers have the least pay and the fewest benefits. And the United States is the only country in the industrialized world that fails to provide a comprehensive social safety net that includes universal health care, universal education to its own people. So we have to provide the kind of social safety net which exists elsewhere in the world, particularly Western Europe, that would enable the residents in the South Bronx to lead a decent, dignified life. And at the heart of that safety net is safe, decent, affordable housing, quality, affordable health care, and a job that pays a decent wage.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Pabon and Ms. Newsome, I'm assuming you want to address the notion of poverty in the 15th.
Well, absolutely. The fact that I've been living here since I was 4 years old, that I was from a single parent, the fact that I was so poor that my name should be next to the word poverty in the dictionary. The fact is that I've developed and raised myself here and my children. I know about poverty. The difference is you're going to hear a lot of rhetoric in this whole debate or this forum. People are going to be talking all the nice things that they want to say they want to do. But the bottom line is, let me tell you something. We need a Marshall Plan. We need someone that's going to go in there that's not interested in building a career, someone that's going to try to make promises they're not going to make, because I've been living here and been seeing it all my life. We need somebody who's going to go to Congress and can really shake it down. And I'm really surprised that some people on this forum have even stated that we should stop saying we're the poorest congressional district. By the way, it's the poorest urban congressional district. The poorest is Mississippi. But the bottom line is that we cannot stop saying it. I'm going to continue to say it until everyone in Washington who don't even know where the South Bronx is, by the way, those 430-something Congress
15 seconds.
They don't even know where the South Bronx is. That's the problem. We need to let every single person know. Gandhi said it best. The best way to organize powerful forces in your favor is to embarrass them. And there's nobody that can embarrass more than revolutionaries going to Congress.
Ms. Newsome?
To address the poverty issue and to absolutely eradicate poverty, we need a guaranteed income, just like Martin Luther King had proposed. That was one of his last missions he was working on. Now, I was the first person in this race to call for universal basic income. I understand the needs of my community. I was born and raised in the district, Bronx Lebanon Hospital. So the struggles that happened to my community, I understand. From fighting for the New York State Tenant Protection Act when 100 Bronx residents were getting evicted from their homes a day because they were impoverished. Now, what we need is a sound economic development plan. And as a financial advisor, I helped over 300 families create generational wealth. Now, people toot their experience and they talk about what they're going to do and what they're going to try and do, but they've had the opportunity. And I want people listening. These people have had the opportunity to help you for 7 years, 11 years, and you're still poor. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump or Obama's in the White House, who's in city council, we are still poor. It's time for us to change that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torres, you have 30 seconds to conclude this group's discussion.
Sure, look, I'm going to fight my heart out to address root causes of poverty, but let's be crystal clear. Anyone who's claiming that they can pluck a magic wand out of thin air and eradicate racially concentrated poverty, which dates back to 1619 in this country, is a snake oil salesman. So I just, you can denigrate the work of elected officials. I know many of my colleagues in this debate who have worked their heart outs to serve their communities, but anyone who leads you to believe that they're going to solve these problems overnight is deluding you.
I feel I should be allowed to respond to that because I am calling someone who leads the nation, who leads the city in homelessness and takes real estate dollars, and more people are going to be homeless. That person is the snake oil salesman.
We will give you an opportunity when your turn comes.
I should point out that I actually received an award from your brother at a Jamal celebration.
All right.
So we clearly did not agree with you.
Everybody will get a chance.
Yeah, like you dropped the ball on the Right to Know Act when you left us to dry and called activists irrational for political gain.
All right.
So let's pull cards.
Do I get to respond to that? Or?
When your turn comes around again, you will be able to do that. Okay. It's just that we have a lot of candidates, and believe me, I love the discussion, but I've got to get everybody in here. It's only fair. So the same question about poverty goes to Mr. Basora. So, sir, I don't want to repeat the question, take the time for it, but what's your thoughts about eradicating poverty in the 15th?
Hi, yes, thank you. I think, so what we represent, I think it is important to realize that poverty can be resolved. I think that it is important that we understand that Washington, D.C. does hold the resources to lift our congressional district out of a lot of what plagues it. What I represent and what we represent is a homes guarantee legislation and a promise to fight for housing as a human right, a federal jobs guarantee for the low income, meaning that having a job that can provide for one's family shouldn't just be a privilege, but a right in the United States of America, and healthcare as a right. And healthcare in NY15 looks like mental health as a priority. So it is something that we can do. I think that we have done it before in the Bronx by the people of the Bronx. And I think that it's a matter of making sure that we take our courage and everything that we built for ourselves to Washington, D.C. Thanks, Gary.
All right. Thank you very much. So then Ms. Lopez, Mr. Rodriguez, and Mr. Ramos can also weigh in. So let's start with you, Ms. Lopez.
I think that we absolutely need to address poverty in America, in our communities. We need to fight for universal human right. We need to fight for worker co-ops so that communities can have control over the job creation process. We need to definitely look into a universal basic income as well, because people are suffering in our communities. And we need to organize a financial system in this country so that it could be more responsive to the needs of the 99% and not the 1%. Because corporations and oligarchs and really wealthy people are controlling the financial system in this country. And in addition to that, anytime that you're running for office, you absolutely cannot compromise yourself, taking real estate developer donations, pharmaceutical donations from industries that are pressing our communities, like many of the elected officials here that are on this stage. And I pledge, and I would like for them to return all of those donations that they've accepted, as I brought up in the previous debate, today and moving forward.
Tomas Ramos, if you would like to weigh in, sir.
Yes, we have to take a holistic approach to combating poverty. It's going to take generations, but we have to start laying down the foundation. I have proposed to invest $100 billion to Title I, II, and III. And also, we really have to start looking at public-private partnerships and coalition building. The federal government is not going to bail us out of poverty. We have to use corporations in a holistic manner and have them invest in our communities when it comes to trade schools, technology centers, and start building a pipeline where we're building workforce development, where we have our young people being trained and working, and then they're going to work in corporations and start building our infrastructure in our communities as well. And de verdad, nosotros tenemos que empezar a educar nuestras comunidades, invertir en nuestros niños y nuestras madres. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Rodriguez had a technical issue. I think he's joining us now. Mr. Rodriguez, you want to weigh in on the notion of poverty?
Definitely, yes. I live poverty. And as someone born and raised, again, I'm one of those 43% resident of the Bronx, born and raised in another country. What I have is a plan, again, to eradicate poverty. And we will do it through bringing investments in our local hospital, the Bronx Lebanon, the Lincoln Hospital. And we need to address poverty, especially in some group, the Garífono, the African American, you know, the newcomer, the student that they are part of the 20% who live in supporting housing, those individuals who live in transportation desert area. I have a resolution at the council that is calling to reduce funding to the military and use the money for social services. We will eradicate poverty from the Bronx by working together, all ethnic groups, everyone who cares for the future of the Bronx deserves to bring major investments. And I will make the Yankee Stadium responsible to invest 10% of the revenue to create jobs.
Thank you very much. Same question now goes to Group 1. And yes, Melissa Mark-Viverito gets this to answer it first. Let's talk about poverty, Ms. Mark-Viverito.
Look, we're not going to be able to move forward if we are not addressing the systemic and historic oppression, right, that has founded this country, and that a lot of the systems, the agencies that are putting forth policies, and those who are shaping policies, right, have to acknowledge that that is a reality. And so we're not going to change this overnight, very clearly, but there has to be a constant demand of this conversation, making people uncomfortable about that reality, that our policies need to be data driven, right, based on that reality of oppression and the inequities that exist, and that funding needs to follow. So then when we talk about poverty, we have to fight for a minimum wage of no less than $15 an hour. We have to talk about cleaning up our environment. I'm very proud of the policies and the legislation we passed to make our city greener. When I was opposed Fresh Direct, and one of the few, if not the only elected official to stand up against Fresh Direct, against all the other elected officials in the Bronx. When we talk about universal health care, when we talk about basically not saddling our children with debt in terms of getting a higher education and getting a quality education. When you talk about that kind of a comprehensive agenda and passing it and pushing it, that is going to uplift communities, and we're going to see the eradication of poverty. Again, not overnight, not from one year to the next. This is definitely work that is ongoing, but we need people in Congress that are going to fight and demand that that change has to be part of the solution.
Let's see, next is Mr. Blake to talk about poverty in the Bronx, in the 15th.
You know, I come to you as someone who my Jamaican mother raised me on Preston and Burnside, where we sold dinners to pay rent, or my late dad, who was a janitor at St. Barnabas Hospital, 1199 SCIU, to create these opportunities. This is personal for us. If we want to break the cycle of poverty, there's a lot of things that have to happen at the same time. We got to create more jobs. We got to help people get skills for the jobs. We have to have higher wages and benefits all at the same time. It's the reason why in the state assembly, my bill was signed into law to get businesses paid in 15 days instead of 30 days. It's the reason why when I was at the White House, I created the Urban Entrepreneurship Program, including bringing it here to the Bronx. It's the reason why in Congress, I've said, and I was the first one to communicate this, neighborhood basic income has to be one element, as well as universal basic income at the same time to do that correctly. We also, it was mentioned earlier around the healthcare heroes, who we have to provide the support to. That's the reason I'm so grateful for their endorsement. If you believe in them, I'm asking you that you believe in us, but also focus on hazard pay. Lastly, when we talk about poverty, there has to be student loan forgiveness for our students that are going to our local schools. We have to have an entrepreneur bill of rights that also happens as well. But then we got to focus on the career. Because too often we're having our kids being trained for a test. We're not actually training them to be educated for careers and jobs in the South Bronx.
Thank you. Ms. Tapper, you are next.
Things that we don't consider is that we need to go back to the basics. A lot of the homes in this district are at NYCHA or in tenements. And medically speaking, if you're living in a building where the pipes are old and you have lead, you don't learn as well. Secondly, I understand this because I was a shop steward at 20 years old for the Teamsters. I've worked for 1199 as an organizer. And my mom at 81 years old went back working as a health official back at the hospital during the coronavirus in the middle of the pandemic. When it comes to education, everyone knows that's the standing point. That's where we build from. Our schools need the funding. When I was on the school board, I found that one section of a district would have a certain type of book and another side of the district wouldn't. If the children do not have the same level of education, they can't advance themselves. Every generation needs the opportunity to do better than the one before. And the speaker, you've been in office and had that opportunity, and you didn't do it when you were there.
I guess that's a perfect time for Ms. Mark-Viverito to have her final 30 seconds here.
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned about the inequities systemically that we have to address, but also then locally, how do we implement certain efforts and initiatives that are going to address these issues as well, right? I believe very much in a community participation and engagement in decision-making. I was very proud to support the first and only existing community land trust in the South Bronx. I am very supportive of worker cooperatives because that is about community wealth
10 seconds.
And community ownership. So we have to not only fight the systemic inequities nationally, but also we have to look at creatively, how do we push forward ideas that are innovative, creative, and that really harness the local energy and power of the constituents of the district.
I object to what you're saying about working together. When you were in the city council as speaker, you blocked the staff from working with their elected officials when they caucused. You made it more difficult for the elected officials to go out into the community when the staffers are the ones who do most of the work. Now you're talking about going to Congress and you want everyone to work collaboratively.
Folks,
You've never done it.
We will give Ms. Mark-Viverito a chance to respond, and I know there was some other dialogues that others wanted to respond to.
I have no idea what she's referring to, so there's no need to address it. We can move on.
Well, you know, everyone else knows what I'm referring to, who was a staffer at the city council when you were speaker.
Let's catch our breaths. We'll take a short break. We'll be back. You are watching the Democratic primary debate for the 15th Congressional District on BronxTalk and BronxNet television. And we'll take 2 minutes, take a deep breath, and we'll be right back. Back with you on Bronx Talk, and we're involved in the Democratic primary debate for the 15th Congressional District. I do want to mention the candidates. I know there are some lingering issues. When your turn comes around, you can address those issues. We just don't have the time to spend on individual conversations. And it may take a while, but everybody will get the opportunity to come back and have their say. So I do appreciate everybody's passion, and let's keep the dialogue going. This question will go to Group 3, and Mr. Rodriguez will get it first. Let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare has always been a priority, but in the middle of this pandemic, it's been raised considerably on the priority scale. There are a range of proposals and possibilities: Obamacare, single payer, universal, private-based, public option, Medicare for all, etc. Many plans. What plan that can be realistically achieved would you advocate for in the House of Representatives? And I guess the bottom line is, how do we make Bronx people healthier? So, Mr. Rodriguez, that's for you.
Universal health care is the answer to this. As I said before, unfortunately, from the $3 trillion that we have for federal budget, $1 trillion go to the military. And then the second area of spending is health and education. I believe that, again, if we reduce funding to the military, from the militaries, and use those funding for social services, such as health, and it will make a big difference. I was there since day one in the Bronx, as I was in Washington High, together with my brothers and sisters who were dealing with the coronavirus. So what happened in the Bronx, Lebanon? What happened in the Lincoln Hospital? Those patients, those individuals that go there, they didn't have the best health insurance. And many people, they were told to stay home. We need to focus on prevention. That's what the brothers and sisters from the African-American community, the Garífono, the Afro-American, the Latino, the Asian, the poorest one need. The best healthcare services, it should be free for all of them, and it should be the same quality.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ramos, for you.
Like I said before, many of the people in this debate, we have the same progressive policy beliefs, and I also believe in Medicare for all, Act 219 that Congresswoman Jeripel Pramila introduced. But this is a much larger picture. Look, we have to look at actions and results. 205 ICU beds for the entire borough of the Bronx. That is how many beds we had prior to COVID-19. Nobody took action. It was inevitable that our community was going to get hit the hardest because we are the poorest urban congressional district, like everybody keeps on mentioning. I sprang into action and I secured $3 million so we can increase ICU bed capacities and save lives. 20,000 N95 masks for our medical staff, St. Barnabas hospitals and Bronx.
15 seconds.
So this comes back to who is going to take action and who has tangible results. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lopez, to you.
First, I want to share with everybody that I'm running for Congress without healthcare. And that's something that many people in the community are experiencing. Millions of people, because of the coronavirus, have lost their jobs because they're frontline delivery workers, and they're the people that are subsidizing our way of life in the community. And I stand with them. And we absolutely need to fight for universal healthcare as a human right, but not universal healthcare may sound the same, but it's not the same. There's some people on the stage that are being called public option, which is not universal healthcare. So I'm fighting for single payer universal healthcare for the communities, because healthcare should not be tied to whether you have a job or not. Millions of people are dying. This is about life and death. So in terms of the coronavirus, what we're experiencing is that the system that we have right now is not working for us at all, and we need to organize to find a better system that makes sure that everybody in this country has the access to healthcare that they deserve.
Thank you. Mr. Basora.
Excuse me. Hi, thank you, Gary. So I believe that healthcare is a right. I think that what's a little different about our vision, right? Because I'm running from my experience as someone, as a product of the Bronx, New York City, is that from my experience, lower income communities tend to, when it comes to these bigger national legislation, they tend to get the last piece of the pie. They tend to be the first ones to be forgotten about. So in addition to healthcare as a right for all Americans, my priority is for the low income people, the communities of color that are very much to be forgotten about when it comes to these platforms. I think that mental health needs to be an absolute priority. I think that specifically for poor communities in our country, if you resolve mental health, you give people a leg up over poverty and over our system. And yes, it needs to come as a holistic approach along with housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez, you have 30 seconds to summarize anything you heard here or what you'd like to add.
Well, I would like to, again, invite my brothers and sisters to work together to improve the health condition, to invest on housing, to create good paid job. We will do it together. I will be standing with as a boy for the African community in the Bronx, the Garifuna, the Asian, the Latinos, the Italians. I am the one that can defeat Reverend Diaz. My numbers speak by itself. Last year, even in Assemblymember Blake, I got 1,000 votes when he got 2,000. When you look at my numbers speak by itself. Yo tengo los números para derrotar al Reverendo Díaz. Lo hice en febrero pasado y lo voy a hacer ahora. Gracias.
Thank you. Speaking of Mr. Blake, you will get the first crack in your group at this particular question. The question is about healthcare.
Well, first, Ydanis should just stay in his car and stay in Washington Heights as opposed to trying to represent the Bronx, because that's the third time he's come at me on this nonsense here. Now, let's talk through the actual facts to your question.
I'm going to win, brother. I'm going to defeat you.
And it talks about healthcare specifically. So our people are dying. And they're dying because we haven't addressed the issues firsthand. I was born with a heart murmur. My mother beat breast cancer. My father passed away from skin cancer. And if you believe in the healthcare heroes, such as the nurses or 1199 or DC 37 or 32BJ or PEF, then I'm asking you to believe in us. Now, what have we done? Through the community relief effort that we started, the Bronx Community Relief Effort, what I want people to go to thebronx.org to learn about, we were able to secure more than $5 million for PPE, for meals, for addressing the conditions on the ground. What would I do in Congress, to your question? I do support public option because I don't think we should be telling these healthcare heroes that they would lose their healthcare. We need to focus on maternal health, especially for our women of color. We have to lower prescription drug costs because you shouldn't be deciding between groceries and prescription drugs. And you got to improve the conditions so that asthma and bronchitis are not the reason why we're being taken out. If you go to blakeforcongress.nyc, you'll be able to see our vision on healthcare and our other policies as well.
Ms. Tapper, you can address that question.
I agree with Ms. Lopez. I support Medicare for all. And most people are not adding in the single payer, which is extremely important. But within the minority community, women are mothers, and we are not given the same type of health care that you need. Myself, I was injured before, and now I'm on Obamacare. And I'm grateful for that, even though the Trump administration wants to get rid of it. I've had very bad experiences being a woman of color, going into a hospital and not being treated the same way. But one of the characteristics that all congressional members need to have is the ability to go to Washington and negotiate and work with everyone to be able to bring back line items, money, back home to the district. That is very, very important. And that's what I would do.
Thank you very much. And so let's see, I lost track here. So the next, I guess the same question, then we'll go to Mr. Pabon, who will get the first
Melissa,
crack.
you forgot Melissa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Ms. Mark-Viverito. I'm so sorry. It's very confusing.
No, I got you.
Up next is Melissa Mark-Viverito.
You know, I believe in Medicare for all. I don't believe healthcare should be a commodity. I believe that we should really beef up and strengthen our community healthcare infrastructure. We should have more federally qualified healthcare centers. We should have more community-based healthcare clinics. We should have a system where people should not be afraid to seek any sort of assistance or support for their healthcare needs, and that it should not be tied to their employment status, to their economic status, to their zip codes. That is critically important to fight for in this country, and to make sure that we are advocating for that. So I will take that fight for Congress. And also, as I mentioned, that community infrastructure that is critically important to support our frontline staff, our frontline workers, to support our family members. So for me, that is a critical aspect of this conversation. And obviously, let's not forget reproductive health rights. I want, you know, my body, my choice, and that reproductive health services needs to be provided and not be taken away from us. because of whatever particular position and stance we may take with regards to our reproductive health. And so that's important too, and that has to be part of the conversation, a priority as well. We see funding that is being taken away from Planned Parenthood and others because of this. We cannot allow that to stand.
The final word in this group by Mr. Blake. I think he needs to be back on camera. There you go. Mr. Blake, you get 30 seconds to just wrap this up.
Look, I think at the end of the day, everybody just wants to survive. And when we're talking about health, it's what happens at the hospitals when they didn't get the PPE, or it's when Black and Latino men are being dragged and choked out on the streets. And all we're saying is everybody needs to survive. And I do think it's important, again, since this is a debate, who was not here, and as mentioned, I agree, choice matters. You can be a man and a feminist at the same time. And it is absolutely unacceptable. We're saying in 2020 to women that men are trying to tell women what to do with their bodies.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pabon, you can address healthcare first for your group.
Living in the South Bronx, I've been a victim of the poisons that are being poured into our community since I was a child. The number of incinerators, the number of cars that go through here. I've suffered from asthma since I was 16 years old. So I know about the situations in terms of healthcare. But the bottom line, listen, well, this is all semantics. We can talk about universal healthcare, Medicare for all, single payer. The bottom line is that anybody who lives in this country, whether you're documented, undocumented, whether you're poor, whoever you are, you should be able to have access to free healthcare, the best healthcare. But you know what? Any of those programs come through, we're still not going to change the situation, because the bottom line is I would also like to present programs where we can help build the immune systems of people in my community. Because when you don't have proper foods, when all you have is these fast foods, when you have poisons being poured into our community, and because of poverty and because of the way people live, they don't have the opportunity to get out of that. So yeah, we're going to continue to have the mental health problems. We're going to continue to have the autism. We're going to continue to have, the violence, because it's the poisons that are being poured into our community. So while we talk about healthcare and the semantics or whatever we're going to call it, let's talk about how we're going to resolve the bottom line, which is poverty, and stopping the food deserts that we have in our community. Because until we don't build the immune systems of our community, guess what? We're always going to be getting sick, no matter what health program you have.
Ms. Newsome, you have the next statement.
Hi. Well, my advocacy actually began because of the healthcare industry. My father, who passed away about 7 years ago, when I was age 11, I was negotiating with the pharmacists in our community because his insurance simply didn't cover it. Now I'm fighting for people like Amber Rose Isaac, who lost her life because of a terrible medical system. And I did this in the middle of COVID. We need free healthcare for all. Why is it that the United States is the only industrialized nation that does not provide healthcare for its people? Then you talk about the issues in the Bronx, and everyone keeps screaming about COVID, but we knew this years ago when the Bronx had Legionnaire's disease. We knew this from the data about the asthma rates, and nothing's been done to change that. Most people who are poor and people of color,
15 seconds.
We don't go to the hospital until an emergency happens. We don't go there. This does not happen. If we had healthcare, free healthcare for all, we'd be able to fight off viruses like the COVID, and that's why I fight for free healthcare.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torres, just a reminder, if you had something you wanted to address from a previous question, you can do that during this time. You can handle it any way you'd like. Thank you, sir.
The issue of healthcare is personal to me. I grew up in public housing, breathing in toxins that caused me to have repeat asthma attacks, and I contracted COVID-19 as a lifelong asthmatic. Almost all the COVID-19 fatalities have at least one comorbidity: hypertension, diabetes. My mother has hypertension. My grandparents died of cardiovascular disease. And so we need to live in a society that establishes that healthcare is a human right, that everyone deserves access to safe, affordable, quality healthcare, regardless of income, insurance, or immigration status. And there needs to be an emphasis on preventative care. Every school, every housing development should have community-based health centers that provide preventative care, because we have a dysfunctional healthcare system where it is more profitable for a surgeon to amputate a diabetic than it is to treat diabetes or prevent it from developing in the first place. So we need to provide people with access to fresh food and quality, affordable healthcare.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pabon, you get the 30-second final word on this.
words in terms of what we want to apply for healthcare, but if we don't address the bottom line, let me tell you something. If we would have a stronger immune system, a lot of people would not have died of COVID-19, because what it did, it attacked the symptoms that you have in your body that were already, at risk. But if you look at the reality of our community, we just can't be able to afford to improve our immune system when we have so much poison in everything that we have, from the food that they're feeding our kids in the schools to the stuff that's out there on the Grand Concourse every day. We don't have quality food. We're going to continue to have bad immune systems. Bad immune systems, doesn't matter what healthcare program we have, we're going to be sick. And that has to stop only when you stop poverty.
Thank you very much. The next question, we will start with Group 1, and Ms. Tapper, you will get the first crack at it. Let's talk about racism. The despicable image of the young man being choked to death by police in Minnesota, as well as the obvious racial profiling recently in Central Park. I saw a video of a man working out in a gym in Minnesota with black people, and he called 911. The fact is, racism is out there, maybe worse now than in years. Is there legislation that begins to put the genie back in the bottle? In the long run, how do you recondition America to believe in fairness and equality?
Well, since this Trump administration has come in, it's become extremely dangerous for people of color in the United States of America. Policing has gotten completely out of control, and legislators have to do something about this. We need to take the power away from the police. We need to write legislation, and we need prosecutorial conduct. We need to make sure that ADAs do not have the right to not charge police officers. Just like the mayor said, and in Minnesota, why haven't these men been arrested? I would have been arrested. You would have been arrested. We need prosecutorial misconduct in the United States. They need to be charged. They can't do this. And regarding racism, I've lived it. My children have lived it. My son was in 7th grade in his science class, and they gave everyone a thermometer with mercury in it to do an experiment. He was the only black child in the class. His thermometer blew. They wanted to expel him because the thermometer exploded. But when my lawyers got involved and said, why did the children have mercury in the first place, it was turned away. But why do we always have to stand up? Why do we always have to fight?
Thank you very much. Ms. Mark-Viverito, you are next.
I was mentioning in a prior question, this is about systemic, right? It's a systemic inequities that exist. In George Floyd, we saw how it ended, but with Amy Cooper, we see how it begins. And this is just unacceptable. So Black and brown communities are facing two major issues, right? COVID and racism. And this is not acceptable. So when we talk about policies and when we talk about funding in this country, we have to start from the understanding that that historic oppression is there, that there is a way of quantifying how that inequity has played out, and then that funding needs to follow. And that is the way that we can't have race neutral policies. That's not the way that we move forward. And so the experiences of the Congressional District is that it has been on the receiving end of these unjust policies for decades, where we have seen such incredible inequity and injustice. And so we need to, yes, tackle it at the top, and then look locally at how we bring in that innovation coalition building to really push back and send a very strong message. And so for me, this is the battle of our lives, and we need strong, very vocal representation in Congress to battle this and many other issues.
Mr. Blake, to you.
As a Black man, I just want to survive. I just want to make it home. And I want to commend Sister Newsome for what she is doing in Minneapolis right now, what she's been consistently doing. Look, I've endured police brutality when I was in high school at DeWitt Clinton. I endured it as an elected official when I was tossed up against the gate. George Floyd was murder. And the 4 officers, they shouldn't just lose their job. They have to be convicted. Similarly, Officer Garcia here in New York, who also choked out a man of color. Amy Cooper must be charged with a hate crime. We got to repeal 58 because there's got to be transparency when it comes to what's happening with our officers. I'm a co-sponsor on prosecutorial misconduct. Now, again, this is important. While I was working on Raise the Age and Discovery for Justice and Speedy Trial, I do think when it comes to race and justice, we have to ask the question, Ritchie Torres, why did you flip on the Right to Know Act? Why did you take money from a man who sided with the KKK over a Black woman in leadership? And lastly, federal hate crimes legislation has to go further. We have to end bail, and we need justice. We just want to make it home and survive. That's it.
The final word, the 30 seconds, will go to Ms. Tapper.
I'm proud of you, that Blake, that you sponsored a bill for prosecutorial misconduct. It takes strength to be able to do that. But years ago, about 10 years ago, Soundview Projects, I was able to stop the police from arresting boys between the age of 14 and 17. They would come out in the morning to go to school, and they would be arrested for trespassing. Their parents wouldn't know the difference and would agree at the precinct to have them charged with.
You want to finish the sentence? That's okay. That's appropriate.
Okay. The children were charged with an ACD because the parents didn't have any legal background and didn't know the difference. And then the same police officers would come back within the 6 months, and then they would end up with a misdemeanor. And they're being arrested for living in their own home.
Thank you. Same question, and yes, Ms. Newsome is in Minnesota right now, so I guess it's perfectly appropriate for you to address this question.
This morning, before we were leaving, we called on all governors around the nation to support and sign an executive order for the I Can't Breathe Act. Now, that act would mandate that if someone is crying out, as we've seen with Eric Gardner, who I fought for justice for, I shut down the FDR highway, I marched around the Department of, as I like to call it, no justice, or as we've seen most recently, where I am right now in Minneapolis with George Floyd, that if someone's crying out in distress, they're ill, or if there is if that person dies, it's a murder, it should be a Class A felony, or the officer should be charged with murder. In terms of police brutality, and as you've seen through this COVID pandemic, I've been on the front lines fighting against Mayor de Blasio. And if people were in office and they pass laws to already make this happen, maybe we could save a Black or brown man. Maybe I won't get assaulted by police officers when I put my body in between them and the community. Maybe I wouldn't be risking COVID in Minneapolis if people, when they were in office, did their job to actually protect Black and brown people.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torres, you are next on this question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I heard Michael Blake accused me of flip-flopping. Is that the Michael Blake who gave Reverend Diaz, a raging homophobe, $1,000 before he was against it? Is that the Michael Blake? Is that the Michael Blake that was for Amazon before he was against it and was accused by the Daily News editorial board of lying about his position on Amazon? Like, he's in no position to lecture anyone on flip-flopping. But I want to address the Right to Know Act, because everyone's bringing up the Right to Know Act without actually knowing anything about it. The Right to Know Act, first, is the first bill that the City Council has ever enacted to directly regulate the police-civilian interaction. So if you are an officer, you are required to identify yourself the moment an interaction escalates. Number two, an officer is required to inform civilians of their right to decline a search in the absence of probable cause. So we set up something resembling a Miranda protection for consent searches. That's not flip-flopping, that's negotiating a bill that represents a landmark breakthrough for police-civilian interactions. The NYPD described the bill as an unprecedented intrusion into the operations of the police department. The PDA fiercely opposed the bill, and there's never been a bill except the Right to Know Act that directly regulated police-civilian interactions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pabon.
As a Latino of this color, you know, I've also suffered, which very people don't seem to think that Latinos, if they go through the racism that a lot of African-American brothers and sisters go through all the time. But I can tell you, if I had the story in the time, I can tell you the stuff that I've been through, horrific. But the bottom line is, look, this country is not going to deal with racism by passing legislation. We can pass legislations to make sure that those who do things wrong get punished for it. But until we don't recognize the soul of this country has been a violent country since it started. There's been violence in this country committed against African Americans by bringing them here as slaves. There's been crimes committed, atrocities against Native Americans. My people, Latinos, even though we're citizens, the way they treat us still today, this country is all about violence. Until we begin to get the soul of this country, to maybe pass a national legislation where we can go back, and this country needs to apologize for all the atrocities that has committed here and around the world. And they maybe begin then to clean the soul, because racism didn't start now. It's been here for a while. It's been embedded. We need to clean the soul of this country.
Ms. Newsome, you can have 30 seconds to wrap this up.
And I'd just like to be very clear when Julio says that no one cares about police brutality for brown people and Latinx people.
How do you say we don't care? How do you say we don't care?
Well, you need to make that clarification because as a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, when Latinx men are harmed by the police, I'm putting my body on the line in the front line and fighting for legislation and fighting for jail time. So I'm there for all people. Now, I know that it was easy in last debates when I was called the smelly N-word and only a Black male stood up for me and no one else on this panel said anything, but I'm not like you guys. I stand up for everyone. So Black Lives Matter and me, I fight for all people, just to be clear.
I just want to be clear that I'm 68 years old, so I've been suffering racism way before Chivona got involved. So therefore, don't misinterpret.
My parents were mad at the civil rights, Allie. It's in my blood, Julio.
I know, but it's nothing about you not affecting Puerto Ricans or Latinos. That has nothing to do with it.
Let's go to the final group, and Mr. Ramos can have the first whack at this very troubling situation.
Yeah, so I'm actually the only person that has been a victim of our criminal justice system. When I was jumped by 5 white men and then arrested by a white officer and then prosecuted and found guilty for criminal assault and spent 40 days in Rikers Island. So this stuff is personal to me, and this is why I do this work. Rikers Island is not a place for anybody that should be. We need restorative practices. We need restorative justices. I've introduced the Federal Fair Chance Act, which you can go on my website at tomasforcongress.com. Anybody that has been formerly incarcerated should deserve a fair chance at a job, should deserve public housing, and should deserve to go back to college with Pell Grants. This Federal Fair Chance Act will enable and help our communities of color that have been oppressed and suppressed for so long
15 seconds.
To get back in the workforce and get back to being stand-up citizens. So this is personal to me, and I appreciate Chivona and everybody else is doing this work. I think we all agree that things need to be changed, but I'm going a different route. This is personal. Thank you.
Ms. Lopez, for you.
Yeah, I just want to take people like a few months back. There are people sitting on the stage that voted for the mayor's jail plan, which was an $11 billion investment in building jails in our community. So we all know that when people build jails in our community, they're going to fill it with our people. And what we need to do, what we needed to do back then is disinvest from the prison industrial complex and reinvest in domestic programs that address the root causes of poverty. Poverty needs to be decriminalized, and we can't have that in our communities. And we also have to remember that policing only protects capital. It doesn't protect our people. So that's something, you know, that we need to recognize as a community as well. And we also need to, you know, make sure that we have more consent decrees so that we can get the federal government involved when there's mispractices happening against our community and abuses happening in our community, like they did with the Rodney King incidents back in the 90s, that they put in the consent decree, you know, on the Los Angeles Police Department. And that's what we need to replicate throughout the country. We need to get the federal government involved to stop these abuses once and for all.
Mr. Basora.
All right, thank you, Gary. Yes, you know, I think that we need to admit is that prejudice based on color is unfortunately rooted in our institutions. So we have to purge all of our institutions, city, state, and national, and recognize that. I think that, and it has to be incredibly holistic. I think we need to end mass incarceration. We need to end the war on drugs, the war on poverty that only affects people of color, that affects African Americans and Hispanics. I think that we need to empower communities of color. I agree with statements of protecting our communities from a lot of the institutional prejudice that we see. So yes, it's real, it exists. I think that we are living in a time when we are seeing it. It's always existed, it's only just being captured. My prayers go to the people in Minneapolis. My prayers go to the family of George Floyd. This is about saving our country. This has to do with all of us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ramos, you can conclude this section for your group.
Yeah, no, it's a tough time right now in this country, and our communities are struggling. and we all really start needing to working together in solving these issues. Regardless of the outcomes of this race, we all got to sit down and we really got to bring the stakeholders, young people, old people, everybody together, because the only way we're going to solve these issues are together. So I appreciate everybody's work that we're doing, but no matter the outcomes, we got to continue doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. We are going to take a short break, and I will offer a little commentary. It would be nice if we could take all 10 of you and put you in office, because it sounds like everybody's got an idea. If we could have a collaborative group, that would work out. Of course, it's not going to, the democratic process doesn't work like that, and we ask all voters to come out on June 23rd to cast their vote for their favorite candidate. We'll take a 2-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about some other issues. This is the Democratic primary debate for the 15th Congressional District. We'll be right back. Okay, back with you in the Democratic primary debate for the 15th Congressional District. I realized with all our organization, we were slightly disorganized, and we did not give Ydanis Rodriguez a chance to talk about the question of racism. So we'll just jump right back in and give you your minute to weigh in on that, sir.
Right. Well, Bob Marley said that we have been shipped through the Caribbean and ordered through American. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if are the new immigrants who came to the Bronx or Latinos or Asian. This is about understanding that we have been living in a systematic racist society. If anyone has any doubt, check out the coronavirus. What I have done my whole life is build a network. It's been part for the freedom of Nelson Mandela, organizing for the freedom of Nelson Mandela. That's my credential that I have. Organizing when the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal demanded a new trial. You know, it's when the sham bell. And one more time, I'm the candidate in this race that can unify all ethnic groups and speak in one voice and be sure that we bring justice, especially in cases that affect most people of colors than anybody else.
Thank you very much. And again, we apologize, but we're glad we got you in on that question.
I just have a quick comment real quick. There's people here that voted for this $11 billion jail-based plan. And instead of using that money to reinvest in our communities and eliminate the root causes of poverty in our city, and it's getting upsetting that people are not talking about this and being real about what they voted for in the past. So Ritchie Torres, I call on you. Ydanis, I call on you. Can you indicate why you voted for the mayor's $11 billion jail-based plan that's harming our communities?
And just for the record, those of us who are not elected were out there fighting against that project.
Okay, so
and thank you for your leadership, Julio.
Samelys, you took money from a jail warden. You took money from a jail warden. So before you point fingers at Ritchie Torres, you need to disclose all your finance and why DSA didn't really want to back you anymore for taking money from prison wardeners, max out contributions.
That's not true, Chivona. And when I met with you before I ran my race, I met with you to indicate the great respect that I have for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I said that the only two grassroots women of color in this race that are aligned with the values of the movement should never be attacking each other. And I will always, and I maintain my promise to you.
I like you personally.
I will not attack you. I have a lot of respect.
I like you personally. But if we're going to call it out, we have to call it out.
And I'm not attacking you. I promised you that I would not attack you. And I've always maintained that promise.
Thank you very much. Let's get back to our organization here, because there are 10 candidates, and believe me, I'm sure everybody has something they want to say about another candidate, and you'll have the time during your time to respond. The first This question will go back to Group 2, Ritchie Torres. And again, if you want to address any of these issues, you can use your time for that. I want to mention the idea of jobs. Unemployment in New York and across the country has shattered all records, certainly in the Bronx as well. As the pandemic eases over time, what's the best path to generate those jobs and get people back to work? In plain Bronx language, you know, talk is cheap. What's the plan? How do we stimulate businesses, especially small businesses in the South Bronx? Mr. Torres, that's for you. And if you wanted to address any of the other issues, feel free.
It's the same plan that we employed during the Great Depression. It's public investment, public works. Like nothing less than a multi-trillion-dollar investment in our own people and our own infrastructure is going to create the next generation of green jobs and address the impact of climate change and enable us to recover from the worst of COVID-19. You know, I want to address Samelys' question. And, you know, to Melissa's credit, I think one of the legacy achievements of Melissa on the city council was the closing of Rikers Island. I remember during Melissa's State of the City, when she announced that we need to close Rikers Island, she was laughed at. The mayor said it was ridiculous. Bill Bratton said it was ridiculous. And she developed a plan for replacing Rikers Island, which has been ground zero for overcriminalization of people of color, with borough-based plans. Under state law, and I'm going to need some time, Gary, but under state law, the jails in Rikers Island were unlawfully unsafe. So keeping them open was not an option. And I'm not a no new jail person. I'm not in favor of abolishing every jail in New York City. So we thought, why not replace them with jails that allow people to remain in their communities? And since the 1990s, and under Melissa's plan, to her credit, there's a 600% decrease in the prison population. That's the greatest breakthrough for decarceration in the history of the United States.
Thank you very much. You know, we can modify the question if the question of jails and how to handle that is, you know, on people's minds. I have no problem going that direction. I know it's a personal one for Mr. Pabon, who's next. So you can, jobs are on the table or jails, however you want to handle it. Let's do that. And then Ms. Newsome can weigh in on that as well.
Well,
you know,
both are important, Gary, because sometimes when you don't have a job,
not enough time.
As when you don't have a job, you might want to do something that's going to get you in jail. But I just want to clarify the thing real quickly. When my son was illegally arrested on Walton Avenue in Girard 12 years ago because of possession of marijuana, which he did not have, took him 2.5 years, right, for me to recognize that why is this happening? You know why our jails were filled? Because they had a law called the discovery law that did not apply, blindfold. Any person got arrested, they had to go give evidence at time of trial, which takes 2.5 years. Why Khalif Browder? I didn't just react. I started an organization, Discovery for Justice. And I want to thank Brother Blake, because when I first was campaigning for him, right afterwards, I said, you got to get involved in this. And to his credit, he came to our first meeting, the only elected official, and he supported. So Blake, you will always have my support on that, man. Thank you. And as a result, we passed the law. Now in New York State, for the first time, when you get arrested, no longer do they have to, the district attorneys can hold that evidence for time of trial. They can give it to you within 15 days. 15 days, they have it. And now they're trying to dwindle that away. So I'm asking all my brothers and sisters on this beautiful screen, please, aside from all this, we got to fight to make sure they don't dwindle away. Well, it took us almost a decade to pass criminal justice reform.
All right, well, you know, the questions, both are on the table, and it's okay. You can address both if you'd like. So, Ms. Newsome, that would be for you. What do you want to talk about? And then, Mr. Torres, you can wrap it up.
I would really like to stick to the question in terms of economic development. And as you see with COVID-19, how Black and Latinx business owners are not getting the support they need, you must understand, and I have a degree in economics, that small business is the backbone of our nation. So empowering the small business owners, making it accessible loans, bringing in opportunities and jobs, this will help us grow. This will help our education. And if we're going to bring up jails and systems, people commit crimes mostly out of desperation. Crimes are about proximity. Crimes are about a lack of resources. This is why people turn to illegal options, because the system has failed them. So we need to bring money into the Bronx. And that's a part of having a true economic economic plan and making it work for all. We should encourage entrepreneurship because that's the only way that you'll thrive and grow in America, and you'll have true power over your life and ownership. And we need entrepreneurial training. We need to teach children while they're in high school how to become a business owner. Like, I had my own financial practice at age 30. I was the first person in my family to ever own that. It wasn't properly televised. It wasn't properly known to people in my community, but this is what we need. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Torres, you get 30 seconds for the final word on this for this group.
Well, what we need in the United States is a vocational schooling renaissance. You know, I reject the notion that everyone has to go to four-year college and learn Shakespeare and then enter the workforce. Federal funding for education, including the Pell Grant, should be every bit as available to career and technical education as it is to conventional college education. We should be investing in career and technical education, apprenticeships, create a workforce that has a fighting chance at a decent life.
Thank you very much. We will move to, let's see, group 4 for this question. And the first word will be to Mr. Basora. Jobs or jails, whatever, or both, whatever you'd like to address, sir. We don't want to squelch dialogue. We want to encourage as much as we can. So it's up to you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Gary. I think I'll try to do both, right? In terms of jobs, we'll start with COVID-19. What we're seeing is that businesses in the Bronx are receiving the least help nationally. And I think it's disastrous, and I think it's an attack on poverty. I think that what we need moving forward is sort of an FDR-like New Deal, right? That saves our small businesses, that saves our poor communities. What we need in the long run is a federal jobs guarantee to make sure that working and sustaining a family is a right in the United States of America. We need to protect and empower small businesses. My family worked in small businesses, from beauty shops to barber shops. It's how we sustain ourselves. And we need to protect domestic marginalized workers, from the beauty salons to the taxi drivers, etc. As for the jails, I commend City Council.
Got about 10 seconds.
But I believe that moving jails into our communities was a mistake. I think that an extra step of making sure that we protect our communities that for decades continue to receive the worst end of any and all deals needed to be had. So I commend everyone for closing Rikers. I think that we needed to protect the Bronx.
Thank you.
And also moving the jails, somebody should ask about the real estate value that Rikers has now. Who's making the money on that? I'm just saying.
Mr. Rodriguez, you can discuss either or both, whatever you'd like.
First, I was the first one that introduced a language to close Rikers Island in my first 4 years as a council when I was elected in 2009. I was told by Christine Quinn in that administration that the city couldn't do it. Second, when it comes to create a good paid job, when you look what I have done already in Northern Manhattan, creating a Cuny Ivy League model, creating a STEM education center at George Washington High School. When you look at my colleague here, their record on how are their school doing compared to the school, the district that I've been representing, I overperformed. All my school, they are in good standards. None of the school, when you look at, none of this council member, none of the elected official, neither assembly member Blake can say that his schools are in good standard. So I will use education as a tool to provide the necessary support, not only that our students, but also that the adult need in order to get good training, to get good paid job around health and technology.
Thank you very much. We will then move to Mr. Ramos, sir.
We have to uplift our small businesses. And as a freshman member of Congress, I will be a champion for Saving Our Street Act, which was introduced by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. This act allocates grants up to $250,000 to businesses that have fewer than 10 employees. Furthermore, we have to really focus on public-private partnerships. Right now, I'm working with corporations where we're gonna allocate virtual internships for our young people for this summer since SYP has been cut. We need people that are gonna actually do the work and produce tangible results. That's what I'm doing right now. And when I get into Congress, I'll continue being a coalition builder and make sure that every single person has access to affordable and healthcare, making sure that we have a criminal justice system that doesn't continue oppressing our community of color, and making sure that education system is fully funded by our federal government, where if you go to my website, tomasforcongress.com, $100 billion, Title I, Title II, and Title III. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lopez, again, both topics are on the table for you.
Sorry, there was a bad connection,
Okay.
and I wasn't able to hear the question.
Okay, the original question was about jobs and how do we stimulate jobs in the borough of the Bronx?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier, where we actually have to invest in worker cooperatives so that communities can have a greater sense of control over the job creation process in the community. We also need to make sure that corporations pay their fair share. We need to absolutely make sure that our labor movement is strong as well. There's a lot of abuses that are being committed against our undocumented sisters and brothers that organize when they're exploited at work, and then they're terrorized with ICE. And they're like, well, if you organize, we're gonna kick you out of the community and the country. So we need strong labor laws, we need worker cooperatives so that the community can have more control over the jobs creation process.
Thank you very much. So we will go to Mr. Basora. You get 30 seconds to wrap this up for your group.
Of course, I think, our vision and my vision for running for office, I think for the rest of my life, is to lift our people out of poverty. You do that by building a bridge between the U.S.'s economy and the Bronx's economy. I believe in a federal jobs guarantee. I believe that people need to have the right to work. And I think that we need someone in Congress, and if I'm honored enough to be elected, that will fight for that will fight for our families having the right to work for themselves and work themselves out of poverty.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to group one, and the same question, maybe you want to weigh in on the jails question too, jobs or jails, and or to Melissa Mark-Viverito. You get the first whack at it.
I want to thank Councilmember Torres for his comments and his acknowledgement about the hard work. And so I appreciate that. In terms of jobs, like we've talked about it, I agree with what's been mentioned about government has a role to play here, right? In terms of investing in public infrastructure projects or public works projects as a way of generating jobs. We have to demand that our minimum federal wage has to increase. We definitely can look at new sectors when we talk about the Green New Deal. A great aspect of that is about renewable energy and the job creation that can result out of that. When we talk locally and the community, right, the issue mentioned before, community land trusts are important about developing community wealth and you're leveraging that equity to create jobs. The issue of worker cooperatives is also really important. And education is central to this, right? When we talk about Cuny right now is under attack. It is under the budget cuts that are being proposed. Austerity measures are not a way of building community wealth or about moving us as a community forward. Those are issues that are critical and need to be frontline in this conversation and this attack, and also the issue of small businesses. I will say this, Gary, I think that the issue of immigration has not been discussed in this debate, and that is something that is of incredible importance to this congressional.
We can bring that up in the next question.
I can bring it up. Okay, so definitely is something that I think is important as well.
Very good. In that group, then, Mr. Blake, it's up to you. Jails, jobs, whatever you'd like.
Well, Gary, I'm going to talk about jobs and justice, which is actually our vision. I want to first go back to an earlier comment made by Ritchie Torres. First, unlike Ritchie, I can acknowledge something that could have been mistaken and make a difference, which is why I demanded that money back. And secondly, when it came to Amazon, I, like RWDSU, who has also endorsed our campaign, acknowledged if Amazon would have come to the table and done correct things, then they could have had that partner. When they didn't, we were in opposition. Ritchie focuses on headlines. I focus on helping people. Now, Gary, to your question, we need to build schools, not jails. What have we been doing? The Bronx Community Relief Effort, through the Knowledge House, through Meta Bronx, through DreamYard. Instead of the city council talking about right now cutting funding when it comes to SYP, we should actually be talking about cutting funding for the Department of Corrections. Third Avenue Business Improvement District, the 500 plus businesses we've helped right now during the coronavirus. EOC, the Educational Opportunity Center, making sure we have skills and training for our young people. Operation Hope for financial literacy. Now, federal level, we of course need to have federal guarantee, $25 at a minimum. We have to focus on the Recovery Act and the next wave of that. We have to have a minority women business and immigrant bill of rights. And we have to have union protections, including hazard pay. You do all those things, if you believe in jobs and justice, then you can join us in what we're doing at BlakeForCongress.nyc.
Thank you very much. And let's see, Ms. Tapper, you, I'm sure, want to weigh in on these questions.
Well, I'm a mother of Black sons, and I have to tell you, if they're out at night, I don't sleep. And where Rikers is concerned and closing it, I'm in between on both sides, and I'll tell you the reason why. Statistically, inmates who have been placed in jails and communities have had better representation, especially if they're poor and they're being represented by the public defenders. Public defenders do not like to go to Rikers and get held in when they do a lockdown. So statistically, again, these young men who have been arrested or women who are poor, when they are placed in a jail, in a community, they have better representation and their attorneys are able to they have less convictions. In regards to also prisons, most people don't realize that, well, I'll move on to unemployment. In the 15th Congressional District, we need job placement programs like BOCES, which teaches you middle-class jobs. Example, making you an LPN, making you a sonogram technologist. We need middle-class training, and we also, the building trades, construction. We need to allow for apprenticeships to come to the Bronx. There are a lot of people in the 15th Congressional District that can become plumbers, electricians, welders. So the city council has a bill whereas only only union workers can work on public buildings. So we have people in NYCHA who can't work because they aren't part of a union and they can't get into the damn unions.
Ms. Melissa Mark-Viverito, you have 30 seconds of the final word on this.
No, I mean, I think just touching on what I didn't get to touch on it as much of the issue of the small businesses. I think it's been alluded to by some of the candidates here. You know, we have examples of incredible vibrancy in the South Bronx. We have, for instance, La Morada, which is an undocumented family that despite their own economic hardship, obviously they don't have access to PPP, but they're providing free meals to immigrant families in the South Bronx. We have a lot of entrepreneurship that is on the ground that is being left out by these recovery packages. So part of the job creation is also really holistically, comprehensively supporting and strengthening our small businesses, because that is important to the fabric and the uniqueness of our community.
Thank you very much. The next question, and we will address it to Ms. Lopez to start. And we're going to ask everybody, because we are running out of time, we'll ask everybody to just get to the policy and as brief as possible. The president and the GOP have said over and over that Democrats want open borders. There are 10 Democrats here. Do any of you want open borders? If not, how would you like to see the nation's immigration policies amended? So we're just going to go right through it. Let's stick maybe about 45 seconds each. Stick right to policy. What would you like to see done, Ms. Lopez, for you?
I would like to see the demilitarization of the border. I would like for us to protect our undocumented brothers and sisters through the Whistleblower Act, which is basically coming up with a visa in case they demonstrate the courage to organize against abusive players in industry and corporations. And I would like to see the repeal of the 1996 immigration laws. I would like to see there be a right to counsel service for people that are organizing around immigration justice and people that are going to be deported. And I think that immigration needs to be decriminalized.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're just going to move on, and I'd love to hear people's policy comments on this. Mr. Basora, you are next.
Yes, so I do not know, I'm not for open borders. What I am for is opportunity for immigration. La oportunidad para nuestros inmigrantes. I believe in empowering our immigrant communities. I believe in DACA and making sure that we reaffirm young immigrants' placement here in the United States of America. I believe in decriminalizing immigration and making sure that we roll back the executive actions from Donald Trump that calls for social programs being a basis for deportation. That's incredibly important to me.
Thank you.
And working to just empower our immigrant communities.
Thank you very much. Let's just keep moving on. Mr. Rodriguez, you are next.
This is where my story resonates with the brothers and sisters Garifano, Africans, Asian, Latinos, because I am one of those 43% resident of the Bronx, born and raised in another country. Myself had to go to 26 Federal Plaza to renew my green card from 83 to 2000. So it's different to have compassion than to go to 26 Federal Plaza. I will go to DC to abolish ICE. I will go to DC to be sure that immigrants that they have working papers also qualify for any other services. And I will go to DC to be sure that we do immigration reform right now. Voy a luchar a Washington para asegurarme que nosotros hagamos una reforma migratoria para todas. Soy el único de los que están aquí que fue inmigrante que vivió con residencia y tenía que renovarla cada 4 años el 26. Voy a terminar con ICE y voy a asegurarme que se haga una reforma migratoria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake. How do we reform immigration?
By bringing everybody to the table. You know, I'm a son of Jamaican immigrants, and you know, it's been mentioned about the Garifuna community. It's the reason I'm grateful that the Garifuna PAC has endorsed our campaign. It's the reason why United African Coalition has endorsed our campaign. It's the reason why 3 Latino electeds have publicly endorsed our campaign as well. It's about how we bring this all together. And when we have a racist, sexist, misogynistic demagogue in Donald Trump and or Ruben, everyone take your pick on, it's the reality of what's at stake right now. That we have to make sure we're standing up for our immigrants. It's the reason why I was a co-sponsor on the DREAM Act that passed here in New York State. It's the reason why I was a co-sponsor on the bill to provide driver's license for our undocumented immigrants. It's the reason why we have to pass DACA on the federal level. And it's the reason why all of us need to have a chance to have success, because we all deserve that opportunity to believe.
Ms. Tapper? Right, just unmute yourself there. Good. Nope, good.
I believe every country, every sovereign country should be able to protect their borders. However, I do not believe that we should have children in cages. If I was your congresswoman, everyone here I would make legal. And then everyone would be granted a green card, and then we would follow normal immigration processes. And this is a person speaking who comes from an immigrant family. And I still have family and relatives coming here from Kenya and from Barbados who are applying for visas. I think the way the children are being treated and the people on the borders are being treated like animals, and I don't think that America stands for that. And it's completely unacceptable.
Thank you.
I've also lobbied. Okay.
Believe me, I wish we had more time.
No, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Mark-Viverito, you can have the final word for your group.
Well, thank you so much. Before, we had coronavirus, we had Trump, who has been just as life-threatening to our immigrant communities than and as detrimental as this pandemic has become. Similar to the way that I abolished ICE out of Rikers here in New York City, I believe in abolishing ICE at a national level. I don't believe that, first and foremost, our families are under attack and they're being ripped apart. So we need really to be strong and vocal and vociferous to push back against policies that are literally killing members of our community. And so that to me is important. I have a proud record of being one of the strongest voices in this city for immigrant communities and helped make and strengthen New York City as a sanctuary city, something that now we are under attack from this federal administration. Those are the kinds of policies at a local level. The fund that was referenced earlier to provide a legal fund for those facing deportation proceedings, we did that here in New York. I want to take that national and make sure that we continue to fight for our immigrant communities.
Mr. Pabon. You just need to unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you. The issue of immigration is much more complicated than to try to give definitions in less than a minute. But let me just give you one definition. Nobody had a problem with open borders when NAFTA came in, right? So trucks can come in and out of the United States and there was no problem. They worked out the process, but they have a problem in terms of people coming back and forth. That's all BS. The bottom line is it depends on who's benefiting from it. For NAFTA, the super wealthy benefited from it, and it destroyed the situations in Latin America, which forced people to want to come over. So the bottom line is if open borders apply for the NAFTA, for trucks to be able to come back and forth and make so much money for the super wealthy, why can't we find a system so we can allow borders so people can come through like the trucks did, but in the process to secure our borders as well. So let's not talk the rhetoric, let's deal with the issues.
Thank you very much. Ms. Newsome?
I wanted to give a shout out to my team because we have been the front lines for immigration. All these beautiful people in this car who I came out with, some are immigrants and some are not. And that doesn't mean like Ydanis tries to play race politics and say that he's the only person who could fight for immigration because he's an immigrant. It's wrong. I've been on the front lines. I know that we need a clear and defined path to citizenship. I know that over the last 20 years, we haven't had any real laws. And as a human being, I know that children shouldn't be in cages and there should not be a means-based test for citizenship. And we talk about what this country was founded on, of course, for white people, not for my people who came here as slaves. It was an open door policy for people seeking religious persecution, and we need to honor that tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The final word of our program will go to Mr. Torres. And so we'll ask you about immigration.
I didn't get to go about immigration.
Oh, you didn't get to, did I miss you? I'm so sorry. So then let's go to you then, Mr. Ramos, and then you, Mr. Torres. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. So I fully support and will advocate in getting the New Way Forward Act, which will help fight the criminalization of immigrants. My father was convicted felon, and then he was deported to the Dominican Republic. When I was 12 years old, our entire family had to leave our childhood and our friends to move to the Dominican Republic. A lot of people are getting deported right now because of low-level misdemeanors and felonies, and are getting deported. So we really need to start advocating for our immigrant communities. And I fully support the DREAM Act, and will continue fighting for that as well. Well, and we have to really create pathways for citizenship for everyone that is currently here undocumented as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torres, you do get the final word here tonight.
Well, Gary, I refuse to accept the terms of debate that Donald Trump sets. I mean, it's a caricature to describe it as open borders. I support a path to citizenship for all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, with a particular priority for dreamers and refugees. I also support the repeal of a provision in federal law, which was drafted by a white supremacist, that allows for the mass criminalization and mass detention of immigrants. That has been the basis for Donald Trump's policy. That should be repealed. Because as far as I'm concerned, America has no hope for becoming a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy without immigration, without comprehensive immigration.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 10 candidates who joined us, we can't thank you enough. I really can barely remember a more impressive presentation. My only regret is we don't have like 2 days to go through every issue completely. We do apologize for any errors we made. We did our best to get everybody a chance to speak. So thank you to, let's see, Marlene Tapper, Melissa Mark-Viverito, Michael Blake, Chivona Newsome, Ritchie Torres, Julio Pabon, Samelys Lopez, Frangell Basora, Ydanis Rodriguez, Tomas Ramos, and also to my producer, Helen Greenberg. Yesenia Ramos has also been doing the timing for us. And we'll just encourage everybody to come out and vote for the candidate of their choice on June 23rd. We will see you around. Thank you so much, one and all, for joining us. Good night.
Thank you, Gary, for having this, and thank you to all the candidates. No matter what happens, we should all work together.
I agree.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.
I'm out here fighting for you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
You need a revolutionary.
Be safe, everyone.
A la gente del pueblo.